Shelly Miscavige. She has not appeared in public since 2005.
Where's Shelly and what happened?
Where is Shelly?
We're looking at like 17 years of a person just missing.
Shelly Miscavige was given into the sole care of L. Ron Hubbard by her parents when she was 12.
This is where Shelly is believed to be being held captive.
Do you believe that Shelly Miscavige is a threat today?
Oh,
Absolutely.
she's seen it all. She's been by his side the whole time.
Welcome to the channel. Thank you for being here. This is an episode of Where is Shelly Miscavige? As always, if you like our content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification so you are notified of new content we release. My guest for today, welcome back, Mr. Mark Fisher.
Hi, Claire. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Doing good. Everything's going well.
Awesome. And before we launch into our episode for today, just to cover a few things, I will link to the 2 episodes we did regarding your story in Scientology. And I will also link to your YouTube channel with Janice Gilman Grady and yourself.
That's great. That's great.
Awesome.
It's our Scientology stories, Peeling the Onion with Mark
Nice.
Fisher and Janice Gilman Grady.
Nice. I'm looking forward to all your content. It's awesome to be expanding the SPTV network here.
Exactly.
Yes. Awesome. Well, just for your sake and for those listening who might be joining for the first time in this Where is Shelly series, I was inspired to do this series because I knew Shelly for 13 years while I worked at the headquarters, Scientology headquarters in Gilman Hot Springs. I then worked with Shelly very closely for 8 years during the time that I was in Religious Technology Center. And actually for 4 of those years, I was reporting to Shelly directly on an almost daily basis, where she was essentially running me as my direct boss. So for example, I had to show her my daily targets of what I was going to accomplish that day, etc. And so I wouldn't consider, and I've never considered, that anyone at that property were friends, quote unquote. That was not the environment we lived in. But I knew Shelly. I respected her. I believed that she was someone who cared very deeply about other people. I certainly know that she objected to the abuses that I personally witnessed from David Miscavige. And so I was inspired to explore the life of Shelly in response to the now viral question, where is Shelly Miscavige? And to me, and I'm sure you'll agree, and I'll get your comments on this here shortly, yes, it's shocking that David Miscavige's wife has been missing for 18 years. But to those of us who worked with her, more importantly, the second most senior executive in Scientology, essentially the first lady of Scientology, has also vanished.
Right.
Yeah. So that was my inspiration here as to what brought us here. And I know that you knew Shelly and know Shelly and worked with her personally for many years. And so I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I first met her in 1976, so she had to be, I think she was still going to high school. She had to be 16 years old, I think, or something, because that's when I first met David Miscavige as well, was in July 1976. And, and then I knew Shelly all during that time, and then I finally left in September of 1990. And the last 6.5 years I was there, I worked with her directly daily. I mean, she, David Miscavige was really my boss, but because she worked for David, then basically she was my boss too.
Yes. So you knew her for a total of, 14 years?
Yeah.
Wow. And so where were you when you first met her in 76?
Well, I just joined the Sea organization in Clearwater, Florida, and I got down there, and I didn't know what the Commodore's Messenger Org is, which are the messengers that work directly with Hubbard. But because I was just graduated high school myself, they said, how would you like to work with L. Ron Hubbard? And I said, of course, yeah, I would love to do that. But anyway, I just remember meeting Shelly because at that time, the messengers that were in Clearwater were actually working at night, and they were handling the communications coming to and from L. Ron Hubbard, because he wasn't in that location. He actually was in California. So they were working at night and handling his telex traffic and different communications to the base. And I
Okay.
just remember meeting Shelly at that time. And of course, Dave was my roommate for, the 3 weeks that I was there. So.
Yes. And what were your first impressions of Shelley at that time?
Well, I'm a guy and I was 17 years old. And so, my first impression was, wow, she's really hot. She had long blonde hair and she was really cute. And I just remember the first time seeing her in a conference room. That was the CMO office basically in the Fort Harrison. And she was reading or doing something, but she was really into John Travolta because John Travolta, had just made it big with Welcome Back, Kotter, and Saturday Night Fever had come out, but not Grease yet. But he had recorded a music album, and she had it, and she was talking about it, and she really enjoyed John's music. That was what my initial impressions were of her when I met her.
Understood. And then what would be your next interaction after that first meeting?
Well, then it was several years until I saw her again because she went and moved to work with L. Ron Hubbard directly in at what was with Winter Headquarters, WHQ, and that was out La Quinta, California, and then eventually ended up at Gilman Hot Springs, which everybody knows is the international base in the Golden Era Productions. And that's when I saw her again, and that would have been until 1981, I think it was, that I came back to the base and I actually saw her then.
Okay. And sorry, just to back up for 1 second, you mentioned that when you were in Clearwater, you mentioned she was going to high school?
Yeah, the messengers that were under 16 had to go to high school. They went to Clearwater High School, the public high school. Like my future wife, Julie Catano and Mark Yeager,
Yeah.
and Shelly, the three of them had to go to high school for a short period of time daily, and then do their post work at night. And
Wow,
then
I
as
had
soon
no
as they turned
idea.
yeah, and then as soon as they turned 16, they didn't have to, but it was a legal requirement because, they were trying to keep in legally keep their rudiments in as far as living in Clearwater, because at the time they were having trouble with Clearwater, for buying the Fort Harrison Hotel and all that. So that's what
Right,
happened.
under false
Yeah,
subterfuges.
that's
So
right.
so it was not that so the purpose of her going to school, or of any of those um, teenagers at the time going to school, it was not to get their high school diploma. It was simply to keep the authorities off their back until they turned age 16.
That's correct. And
I
and
see.
I was like, I had just graduated high school the month before,
I
and I
see.
had my high school diploma and everything. And I'll never forget, David Miscavige looked at my diploma because I had it with me in our dorm room, and he said, "Oh my God, you graduated high school." He says, "The only person who's done that in the Commodore's Messenger," and we had a good laugh about it. But
Oh
yeah,
gosh.
Hubbard wasn't big on education, and just with both Dave and Shelley years later is we're not that aware of what was going on in the world, or what the history was of our country, or what, how government worked, or it just basic reading and writing. I mean, they could read and write, but I meant like the things you learn in junior high and high school, they were
Right.
literate, you know what I mean, in terms of those
Yeah,
things.
and
They're
for that matter,
literate in
even
Scientology stuff, but
yeah, and
not into
even
the,
the laws of the land,
yeah,
like
not.
we learned Scientology policy as our overriding operating laws. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, exactly like our constitutional rights that you learn in
Yeah.
school. You know what I mean? The Bill of Rights of freedom. They go, oh, freedom of religion. Yeah, of course. But then there's other freedoms that you have, and they never teach those in Scientology. So if you're a kid and you're growing up in this stuff, you just don't learn them, and unless you read about them on your own.
Right. Yeah, really good point.
I mean,
Okay,
I don't
awesome.
know what your
Yeah, I
experience. I know you grew up in England. Yeah.
Yes. No, I never graduated high school either. Um, I
Right.
joined this organization when I was 16. But so getting back to Shelley, in this series, as I mentioned at the beginning, I've been exploring and learning so much about her life. That's why I just was curious about that high school piece. But I don't know if you know this, Shelley's family got into Scientology when she was just 4 years old.
Yeah, I did know that she got in very young, just like,
Yeah.
yeah, the other messengers that were on the Apollo, because she had been on the Apollo on the ship, and she was she wasn't an original messenger, but she was in the second wave of messengers, and she did work with L. Ron Hubbard closely on a daily basis.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've heard stories, or you will hear stories too, about how, because she was younger, she was kind of treated like a little kid by the other
Yes.
messengers who are more senior. So they didn't really
Right.
cotton to her too much. And she felt resentment towards them for that. And that I saw that exhibited years later, where she had resentment towards the messengers who were original messengers, people like Janice Gillum Grady and Terry Gamboa and uh, Annie Broker and Clarice and things like that, where that they basically treated her more like a kid,
Hmm.
and she didn't
Even
particularly
to
care for
Clarice,
that.
her own sister?
No, not that Clarice. It was
Oh, a
Clarice
different.
Rousseau. She was
Oh, I
Clarice
see. Okay.
Topham, yeah,
Yeah.
and then I think Dee Dee Riesdorf. Anyway, but I'm missing a few of them, but I'm just saying that she always felt, because she was younger. You know what I mean? The younger messengers, there was a age gap, with them, and she probably was close with Annie later on.
Yeah, she
But
was.
on the ship, the older kids ran off, like they were teenagers, and she probably was, what, 10, 12 years old,
Yeah,
she's very young, and so they didn't particularly hang out.
I see. Yeah. Interesting. All right. Well, so cutting back, so now moving forward, the next time you run into Shelly, you're at Gilman Hot Springs.
That's right. And Gilman Hot Springs, at the time, I didn't work with her or anything like that, but she just was at the base. And then eventually, what I really remember is when um, she became David Miscavige's assistant. They were already married at the time, but
Yes.
she had been the commanding officer of the Commodore's Messenger unit at Golden Era Studios. She was in charge of the CMO. They had a Commodore's Messenger unit there, that basically handled all the messenger duties there at the international base and the movie studio. And in that unit, they actually were training up messengers on duty who would actually work directly daily with L. Ron Hubbard when he came back to the property, because the whole purpose was, for the base, was so that he could come back and do his research and film his movies and do his audio recording and everything there. But at the time that I got there, L. Ron Hubbard had run off and hid because of all the lawsuits and the IRS and the government coming after him. And
Yes.
so he was off with, Pat and Annie Broker. And so, we would get communications and things, but the whole purpose of us being there at the base was, getting it ready for him to come back so
Yeah.
that he could do his movies and do his research. And so Shelley was in charge of that Commodore's Messenger org at the Gold Base. Okay. And so that was her duty at the time when I first saw her again. She was on that.
Okay. And so what year was this roughly? Do you remember?
1981. Yeah, it would
Okay.
be 81.
Okay. And she was already married to David Miscavige by this point.
Yeah, she was married to David then. And so she was in charge of that unit, but she got removed, and I don't know exactly why she got removed from that unit. There are other people that will know the details of that. But so when I
Yes.
saw her, she
Yeah,
actually
no,
was.
it's interesting that you mentioned that because when I was talking with Gary Jackson Moorhead, he was
Mhm.
um, assigned as guard to both Shelley and Janice when they were
Yeah.
having to do heavy manual labor. It's like, oh
Yeah, I
my
was going to say
goodness.
she was doing manual labor at the time. They were doing renovations for the Star of California, the ship,
Right.
the, the
Yes.
the swimming pool that was turned into a clipper ship, and you know what it is. But
Yes.
we were doing that renovation, the whole purpose was to get the base ready, because the idea was L. Ron Hubbard was going to come back, and the sooner
Right.
we got it done, everything's always an emergency. So they were working around the clock, and she was doing that kind of work. But
Yes.
what happened then was, David was out, Miscavige was out in Los Angeles, and he had two positions. He wasn't the chairman of the board of anything yet. At that time, he was the action chief of CMO International. The action chief is the person who runs missions and sends them out to handle things, right? And he had done
Yes.
that for
So
several
still a
years.
senior
And then he
executive,
also,
but not top dog.
oh yeah, he was a senior executive, but he was not the big boss. He was not
Right.
the big boss in those days. So he was action chief CMO International, but he also was the special project ops was his actual title that they did. In other words, he was a special projects operator, which was basically a mission operator. But the special project that was going on was the reorganization of the Guardian's office, the corporate sort out of Scientology, the lawsuits, the setting up of author services, all of the stuff that needed to be handled for what we called an all clear for L. Ron
Yes.
Hubbard to come back to the international base so he could make his movies, do his recordings, do his research.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So he was
Understood.
doing that. All right. And there was a CO, commanding officer of CMO International, who was above David Miscavige at that time. At the time, it was Dee Dee Reserve. Okay. And then I don't need to go into the details on that, but she got removed. And then then
Yes.
John Nelson was the commanding officer. Then he got removed. Okay. And that's when DM started taking over. But anyway,
Yes.
so Shelly, he had an assistant, like a communicator assistant in Los Angeles with him. I'm not going to mention who her name was because she's kind of under the radar.
Okay.
But anyway, the woman who was his assistant got in a serious car accident, like a really serious car accident, and was in the hospital and almost died.
Oh
So
no.
at the same time that Shelley had been removed as the Commodore's messenger or commanding officer at Gold, at the same time this other woman had this bad car accident, so
Wow.
he needed another assistant, so he scooped up Shelley, and they
I
were
see.
together
I
from that point
didn't
on.
have the connection of how
Yeah,
she came to work for him directly. Yeah, because that is very unusual
yeah,
in the Sea organization. There's only a
yeah,
handful
a
of
couple's
examples of
working
that.
together.
Yes.
Yeah, particularly since he was not the senior executive that he later became, but he was
Right.
able to get the work he was doing was considered so important that his wife, I need somebody, so he scooped her up, and
I see.
then she was in Los Angeles working as his assistant, during that time.
Okay. Understood. And then, so the next major interaction you had with Shelley was during your time in Religious Technology Center.
Well, it was before that.
Okay.
It was when we set up. What happened was, Miscavige, like I said, was handling all of the legal and corporate sort out stuff. He then
Yes.
became the chairman of the board of Author Services, right, which was L. Ron Hubbard's for-profit corporation, and Shelley
Yeah.
worked for him
His
there.
literary organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what happened was that Miscavige also, though, he was the conduit to L. Ron Hubbard. All traffic and communications, any submission, anything had to go through him to go up to Pat Broker would then pick it up and then take it to L. Ron Hubbard, and that was the only communication line to L. Ron Hubbard. So Miscavige and Shelley would have to come back and forth to the Gold Base because they spent majority of their time in LA and
Okay.
back and forth. Well, L. Ron Hubbard came up with the idea, and he sent down an advice or order or whatever to set up a corporate liaison office, which is what I was chosen to be in charge of that. I was working in the beginnings of RTC. It was run by a woman named Vicky Asnaran and Jesse Prince, and I was brought up. And we talked about this in our video. I was brought up to be the audio AVC, authorization Verification, Correction in charge of the unit, which you later worked in as well, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, so I was brought up for that. But so then this order came down. Well, anytime a new order came down from L. Ron Hubbard, people jumped on it. They got, we want to get up a compliance to them right away. So Miscavige was looking, well, who should I have head up this office? And Vicky Asnaran suggested me. And so I met with David, and then Shelly, of course, was working with him, and I got chosen to do that. And that's when our relationship, started on a daily basis for another 6-7 years.
Understood.
Yeah.
And what were your impressions of Shelly working with her on a daily basis?
Well, Shelly was dedicated. She was a dedicated L. Ron. She believed in L. Ron Hubbard, and she believed in his technology and his policy, right? So
Right.
she was a diehard as far as that goes, and she was
Yeah.
a stickler. I don't know about your experience with her, but she was a stickler on sticking to green on white, which is the policy letters, or red on white, which was the technical bulletins. Was that an
Yes.
experience like you had working with her?
Yes, very much following Hubbard writings to the letter. I mean, that's true of most Sea Organization members and most Scientologists, at least. But definitely at that level, she was one of the toughest on that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'll bring it up because later on, she did. She was a true believer. She followed that stuff, right? I didn't have patience, but I lost you for a sec there. Anyway, but in my opinion, because I worked with her and I worked with David Miscavige, right?
Yep.
Sometimes she lacked judgment in terms of engines, because she would robotically almost go, oh, well, it says it here in the policy letter. But meanwhile, you had something that was more priority that Miscavige had ordered, or L. Ron Hubbard had ordered, that you had to work on, so that
Right.
she'd be pushing something that was lower priority. Do you know what I mean? So she lacked a
Yes.
little bit of judgment in regards to what was important and what wasn't. And that came up numerous times when I worked with her.
Okay. Understood. And what were your observations?
Yeah, and
Sorry, what were your
I'm
observations
sorry,
of
go ahead.
Shelly's interactions with Dave at that time, David Miscavige?
Well, I mean, they were a couple. They were married, and I've had people, mention to me, oh, were they ever affectionate or anything like that? They were as affectionate as you could get in the Sea Org, you know what I mean, in
Right.
public. It wasn't like, making out in front of people or holding hands or that type of thing. But, I saw them in their private moments, because I had a connecting office. My office was connected to theirs, and I dealt with Dave and Shelly. I not only handled their administrative stuff, but we also handled their personal stuff, all of their meals and their uniforms and anything having to do with her. I had people that worked. I had female staff that helped handle that stuff, right? So
Yes.
we would see them in their private moments and all that, and they cared for each other. It wasn't like that it was a marriage of convenience or anything like that.
Okay.
I saw tender moments from time to time, but generally speaking, as you probably well know, I mean, when you're in the Sea Org, you don't really have time for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I only asked that because during the years that I worked with Shelly Miscavige and David Miscavige very closely, I never saw any tender moments or any um,
Yeah, no,
any
I
any
believe you.
personal. Yeah. So that's why I was curious to hear your perspective from, because obviously we talked about this when we did my interviews with you earlier, that like you were
Yeah.
there until 1990. I arrived in 1991. So we have almost, between your 14 years and then my 14 years, that's a total of 28 years of observations of Shelly and David Miscavige.
What was your observation of their personal interaction
Just that they
when you
did
were
not
around them?
have. I saw signs of that Shelley was increasingly uh, disturbed by David Miscavige's physical abuse of staff, and I was recounting the other day that I'm sure you knew Jan Sims.
Yes.
Yes. So Jan Sims had escaped in, I think, 92.
Hmm.
They tried very hard to get her back and they failed. And Jan Sims
She
had
was a
been,
friend of Shelley's. She was
she
like probably
was,
one of the closer friends of Shelley. Yes.
right, which is just what I was going to say. Shelley and Jan were very close friends. Jan also worked in Religious Technology Center, where
Yeah. Hmm.
I didn't work there at that time, but I, I was promoted into Religious Technology Center in 1996.
Hmm.
Well, in I think 2002, during the time that I was reporting to Shelley almost on a daily basis, there was an instance where Shelley was obviously very upset. And again, we never really, it wasn't, being in this organization was not a format where you expressed grievances, or
Right.
even or even voiced any kind of anything. But
Nothing. No
on
complaints.
right, exactly. But in this instance, Shelley said that she thought Jan Sims was the smart one
Uh-huh.
to have gotten out of there.
Oh, to have gotten out. I get
Right.
it.
This was, I mean, by this point, Jan Sims had been out of there for 8 years. And Shelley
Well, no,
commented,
exactly. I mean,
yeah,
the thing is that there's prior to 1990, and then there's after 1990 when it comes to David Miscavige.
yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I
And
mean?
I don't know.
He,
I don't
he
know. I think
became
yeah,
increasingly abusive.
yes,
You know what I mean? Like we were talking about this the other day. We were watching one of the videos or whatever, and
yeah,
it's like I got to the point where like I put up for a very short period of time, and then I went, he's off the rails. Now it
yes,
got way worse from the stories that I've been told by Amy Scobie and you and Mark and all that, and I go
yes,
like, wow. I mean, so I'm sure for Shelley, it was the same thing because I'll give you an example. All right,
yeah,
I I had somebody that worked for me in my office, Jason Bennick, and I know you know who he is, right?
yes,
And this is like early like 1984, 85, that type of thing. And it was the first time I ever saw Dave go after somebody physically. We were in his office, and Jason was sitting in a chair across from him at his desk, and it was Shelley at her desk, and I was just standing there, right? And Jason, I don't even remember what he said, but it was something that David Miscavige just did not, he thought it was a flippant remark or something. He
yeah,
literally came around his desk and grabbed Jason by the shoulders. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And Shelly and I both went, Dave, stop. You know what I mean? Like we literally like, hey, that's not okay. Don't do that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And he stopped. He stopped. And so like that was the one time, but like we were like just, hey, that's not okay,
right,
and Jason apologized, and that was over. But then, of course, as you well know, I mean, he got to the point where, like, right before I left, he beat me up in the garage, and that's when I went, I'm over this. I'm not. This is not Scientology, right? And then I was
right.
gone. So I'm sure that Shelley got increasingly more and more frustrated with him. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and another time she had commented to me personally that I had no idea what she was going through. Paraphrased. And again, in a situation where we did not talk about grievances, we certainly, it was absolutely forbidden to say anything negative or even look sideways at David Miscavige.
Yeah.
So, it spoke volumes to me that and honestly, at the time, I felt guilty because I was like, my gosh, this poor woman is being put through hell, just like we all are. But, when it's somebody else, you kind of, I don't know, it's tough.
And she didn't really did Jan Sims was really her only friend when I was around her. And
Yeah.
you really can't call people friends in the
No.
Sea Org because you don't have time to socialize. But when they had days off, they would go shopping together. They would do things together. I mean, she didn't have a lot of people that she would do that with. Another
Right.
observation when it comes to Dave and Shelley's personal interaction, okay? Like if they took a liberty, if they took a day off, okay? David Miscavige would not go off on with his wife to go out to
Hmm.
dinner or go to a movie by themselves. No, he always drag along a whole entourage. I don't know what it's like when you were there, but
It
like
was
if
it
they
was the
were on
exact
the day
same.
off and going to the movies, they took us with them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or they took Mark Yeager and his wife with them, or whatever. David Miscavige always had to have an entourage around him, in my opinion. That was my observation. He never
Yes.
did things rarely alone. There was one time that I went skiing with him, and at the time it was myself and Larice Stukenbrock, who later became his assistant, right? But we went skiing with Dave on a day off. Shelly wasn't around. I don't know what she was doing, but we went skiing up at Mountain High, and then funny thing was is we ran into Arthur Hubbard, LRH's son, there too, who was
Yeah.
skiing.
Huh.
But
Small
that was
world.
the one time I ever did something alone with Miscavige on a fun basis. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah.
And and the same thing with Shelly. I actually felt sorry for her because they actually didn't really take time together. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And they
Absolutely.
had the opportunity to do it, whereas other staff did not, because
Right.
as you well know, I mean, Sea Org members like you and your husband were separated for long periods of time, and you didn't really even have time to eat meals, let alone see each other, right?
Yeah.
Well,
No.
Dave and Shelley were together 24/7. Okay,
Right.
and when Miscavige wanted to go see a movie, he'd just up and go and take people with him in the middle of the day or the middle of the evening. You know, it
Right.
wasn't like, oh, there were no rules for him, you know.
Right.
And I think part of the reason that he took people with him too, because at the time he was not totally in control. I mean, we're
Right.
talking L. Ron Hubbard was still alive and this and that, but I think he wanted other people that he could point the finger to and go, yeah, I wasn't the only one. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? In other words, he wanted
Interesting.
somebody else that could go like, yeah, it wasn't just me, you know?
Yeah.
He never
Uh,
did that, but I always got the impression that's what he wanted to do.
right. Which it's funny you say that because in Scientology, that's mutual outrootements, meaning you were part of it too. So you're not going to rat me out because, hey, we were in that together.
That's right. That's right. Because this, I'm talking like this is before L. Ron Hubbard was dead, okay, before he
Right.
died. So the only communication line was through Pat Broker to Hubbard, wherever he was at the time, right?
Yeah.
So, but there were ways that people were trying to get around him to get to LRH. So he did not, you know, he was very minding his minding what was going on, you know.
Yeah.
But my other interactions as far as that. The other thing that I remember too about Shelley and Dave is that, you know, David Miscavige can make really crude and flippant remarks towards other women. You know,
Right.
I don't know if you ever observed that or not, but like, you know, Shelley would be with him, and like you're in my office, right? Because we had two women that worked in my office. Jeray Rathman, who was Marty's wife at the time, and then she became Jeray Cruzen and Jeray whatever. She handled their personal things down in Los Angeles, and then would
Okay.
come back and forth to the base. And when I say personal things, I meant their laundry, their rooms, anything they needed, right? And
Right.
also, Shelley could go shopping anytime she wanted. She would just tell Jeray, and they would go out together. But they usually was to go get things for Dave or whatever they were doing, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, DM would come into our office and make some lewd comment towards Jeray, who was, you know, well built and all that. And Shelley would just roll her eyes and look like a sad puppy dog and walk back into their office. Of course, Dave would, what? What? You know, like, what did I say? You know? And then he'd
Yeah.
go back in there and she'd be at her computer, like, you know, hang dog face, you know, rightly so. And he'd come over and he'd, you know, apologize to her and that type of thing. But that happened on a routine basis.
Yes. I witnessed a number of instances of that too in later years. Like, for example, with Jenny DeVocht Linson
Hmm.
and his stewards at the
Similar
time.
type thing.
Yes, very definitely. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so so coming back, was there anything else you wanted to cover in terms of your personal experiences with Shelley?
Yeah. Well, this is look, I have, you know, the utmost sympathy for Shelley.
Yes.
I wouldn't want anybody to be in the position that she's in now and has been for the last many years. Okay.
Right.
Um, David Miscavige will never let her go. Okay.
Right.
She knows where everything, I mean, she was with him 24/7. Okay. And she
Yes.
would be there in the office when they would go over legal things that I wasn't allowed to be in, and they would shut the door. Okay. So
Yep.
he will never let her go. Okay.
Right.
And he will never divorce her for the same reason, because all of their finances and stuff, they got married in California. So there's claims that she could make if she wanted to, and so that'll never happen. So I
Right.
feel sorry for her for that. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? Um, but by the same token, I have, she did some things that I just didn't agree with and I didn't like, and I don't hold them against her now. But at the time, I was pretty upset about it, because I don't know about when you were working with her closely or whatever, but she was the person that would literally, if someone was in trouble
Yep.
and they were getting security checked, and which is where they get dragged in on a meter and questioned, what are your evil purposes towards David Miscavige, what is this or what is that, whatever. She would
Yes.
read the knowledge reports would be written from those sessions, okay, of what came up,
Right.
whatever it would be. Could be a
Whatever the
sexual
person
thing,
had
it could be
confessed to.
whatever.
Yes. Yep.
Right. And so copies of those would be sent up to Shelly. Okay. She would read them, and then she would brief DM on them, David on them.
Yes.
And it was not above David Miscavige to then, the next time he saw that staff member, go over exactly what they brought up in session or
Right.
in the knowledge report, to
Yeah.
the point where when I left, right before I left, he used to make people stand up in front of the whole base at muster, and then he would say, here's what this guy's been up to in session, and blah 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 blah, and it was very humiliating. Right. And that
Right.
was another thing that I went like, okay, this is not Scientology. This is not why I got involved in Scientology. We're here to help people, not to humiliate them. Right. So
Right.
I have a little bit of a bone to pick on that, because Shelly went through that. The other thing that would go on with those session KRs too, particularly when I was being sec checked, I got removed, a couple of times where I had to do, manual labor for a while, and I was being sec checked, and then I'd be put back on my position. Right. Um, if she read the reports and she didn't think that you were coming clean, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
or you had things that had, they weren't gruesome enough over, oh, she would, send it back and saying he's not come clean. Same thing with
Right.
Miscavige. You do the same thing.
Yeah.
So in a
And
way, she enabled David Miscavige some of his bad behavior, and
true.
that I didn't
Though
particularly care for.
right. No, and I absolutely saw the same things. Though from my perspective, Shelley was not the one driving that. David
No,
Miscavige
no, no,
was.
no.
Yeah,
Miscavige was,
but
yeah.
but you're right. As she worked so closely with him, she was certainly party to what he was doing in terms of humiliating staff publicly. And it's so ironic, speaking of the, confessional reports. So somebody confesses and then it's made broad public knowledge. So much for priest, penitent, confidential, all the stamps that they put on the folders, right?
Right.
On the counseling records that they keep on everybody. But the irony to me, and obviously you know this as well as I do, but then
Yeah.
the second anyone leaves Scientology will turn around and use that
Yeah.
confessional information against them.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm not sure if it was, I saw a Q&A with you and Mark or whatever you were talking about, like when you, a confession or a security check, a lot of times, before, if they say, I'm not auditing you, then they go, oh, we can use this in ethics, right? But there's also was a purpose, just like a Catholic confessional, where you're
Yes.
supposed to be able to tell your auditor things that you're not proud of or whatever, get all the details, and then you feel great, right? And then
Yes.
there would be a reality factor that would be given to you by the author saying, basically, you're forgiven. I forget what the wording was. You may know because you were an auditor. And
Yes.
there would be a tremendous relief for the person going like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
Thank
it's
you very
like by the
much.
power invested in me by Scientology, you are forgiven for your confessions. There's a Hubbard writing on it.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen that done probably twice.
Right. But see, here's the thing. Like you said, Miscavige, bastardizes this stuff, right?
Right.
Because there never was confessionals. It was always, I'm not auditing you because we
Correct.
want to know so we can use it against you. In other
That's
words,
right.
they were using the power of people telling, the truth and coming clean to then use that as data against them. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Control and
blackmail material,
leverage.
whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so back to Shelley, and to answer your question, by the way, in later years, Shelley developed a friendship with Barbara Ruiz, who was the head of author services by this point.
Uh-huh.
This was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And they spent quite a good amount of time together in Gilman Hot Springs. Barbara would come up from Los Angeles and spend time with Shelley. But when Battlefield Earth, the movie, was released
Mm-hmm.
and bombed, Barbara was persona non grata after that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking about this just now when you're saying that. I feel sorry a little bit for her because you probably know too, is like it's hard for her to become friends with anybody for
Right.
two reasons. Number one, they'd be afraid, if they got in trouble, you know what I mean? They'd be really close to David and he could get them in trouble. But number
Right.
two is Shelley couldn't make friends with people because she didn't know when next thing you know, they'd be in the rehabilitation project force. They'd just be kicked out or something would go wrong.
That's
So I
right.
feel sorry for her for that too, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I know that now she has 3 dedicated handlers.
Hmm.
One of them is Antonella Teasy.
I know her. I loved Antonella. She was
Yeah.
my cramming officer, sec checker for, I don't know, the last 4 months I was there. I loved Antonella. She was such a
Yes,
sweetheart.
she is. And I've no doubt that she has become a friend of Shelley. Nonetheless,
Yeah.
I also have no doubt that Antonella equally is under great pressure to keep
Hmm.
Shelley in line and report anything and everything that she observes.
Right. And that's par for the course because Miscavige had handlers watching Mary Sue Hubbard until the day she died. And
Right.
same thing with Tom Cruise's staff. They hired staff to work for Tom Cruise, and those
Yes.
staff reported directly to Miscavige every day what Tom Cruise was doing. That's
Right.
just his modus operandi.
Right. And Shelley oversaw the hiring of those staff, speaking of which.
Exactly. And that's the thing.
Right.
Look, I'm not blaming her, but she was an enabler in many ways.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Meaning that, she provided the information that he wanted,
Yeah.
and again, she would have gotten in trouble if she didn't. But by the same token, that was the only rub I had. Now, is she left tomorrow? Be happy to help her. You know what I
Yes.
mean? She can come live here in Las
Anything
Vegas with
she
us.
did doesn't justify
No.
18 years of captivity.
Absolutely not. And also her dedication to L. Ron Hubbard. I know why he sent her up, in my opinion, this is my opinion,
Yeah.
up to work at this Church of Spiritual Technology on the preservation of L. Ron Hubbard's technology and policy. And it's because, like I said earlier, she totally believed it and totally, L. Ron Hubbard basically was her father figure for many years. And so, to her, that's something that she could do where she not having a lot of responsibility and, could, do her job and feel like she's contributing something valuable in her
Yeah.
mind.
I've heard that come up, and honestly, I don't believe that she's working there. I believe
Oh,
she's
okay.
she's just personally, because the convenience of that Church of Spiritual Technology is also that it's it's up in Running Springs in California, incredibly isolated. And
Yeah.
those factors seem far more applicable to Shelley's scenario than that Shelley was just put off on a special project. In fact, that's that kind of line of, oh, she's working at there now. Just personally, from what I observed, that was always a cover up for somebody who was just being held in captivity.
Yeah, and then the other thing too, the proximity, because at the
Right.
time Miscavige was either at the Gold Base or in LA, so it was very easy to go up to that Lake Arrowhead area or whatever rim of the world. I mean, it's only an hour and a half drive. It's not that far. So if you needed to go see her or see what's going on, she was right there.
Right.
There were two other things that I thought of too.
Yeah, and
And
sorry,
you'll
before you go
sorry,
on to your two other things, just added
yeah.
comment while we were talking about that property. So, other than the Gilman Hot Springs property, that is the most isolated and secure property that I know of.
Oh,
And of
absolutely. Hey, it
and
got
of
snowed in
course,
this year. It got snowed
yes.
in this year. They couldn't get out.
Yes, and so if you're talking about Shelley playing devil's advocate, there's no
Yeah.
way she could be held captive at Gilman Hot Springs. Far too many people had very great respect
Oh
for her
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, it serves a secondary purpose. And again, maybe she has a job there. I just don't buy that really for a second. And I do believe she's being held captive. What
Yeah.
maybe she agrees with it and maybe she doesn't. But in this day and age in the United States of America, for somebody to just have vanished publicly like this, and again, getting back to it, you and I, in the years we spent in Scientology, Shelley was always there. She was
Yeah.
always at David Miscavige's side. So to have her
Always.
just
Even
be
going around the property.
banished, right? Exactly,
Yeah.
and at public events, at at the CC galas, the events at Celebrity Center with all the celebrities, she was. She wasn't ever a public speaker that I know of, but definitely she was a known figure in Scientology. And so the fact that she just vanished and nobody is having even bothering to ask, of course, it's not that they're not bothering to ask. They are afraid to ask. And Leah's the
Yeah.
only one that ever stood up and had the guts to say, where is Shelley? And look what happened in that scenario.
Exactly.
It's just crazy. Anyway,
It is
again, these are all
crazy.
things that have inspired me personally to be here talking with you today.
Yeah. Now let me ask you this, because this is the other thing that happened too. Towards the end of my time in the C organization, was we computerized. Okay, so we got computers set up, and this is the late '80s. Okay, and we
Okay.
had our own computer network and all that. But you guys talk about the Duke of Chug, and on your thing and all that, right?
Yes.
But one of the things that they computerized that are based on L. Ron Hubbard advices was orders logging. Okay, and I don't know
Yes.
if you ever dealt with that, but the computer basically was supposed to have no emotion, no
Right.
emotion. Basically, if a time machine or if a date was set for an order to be complied with, it had to be complied with. You know what I mean? That's the way the computer would look at it, right? Well,
Right.
Shelley got to be the enforcer of that. Okay, so
Yes.
and like I remember Mike Rinder recently said there was like a printer that just was printing out non-compliances all the time. You know what I mean? To all
Yes.
the orders that would be given, because Miscavige would throw out all sorts of things, right? And at the
Absolutely.
time when I was there, he wasn't doing that. It was L. Ron Hubbard orders. So you could be working on something that was really hot and really important, but then here's Shelley nudging you on orders that were like stupid, and then basically, they were low priority, and she
Yes.
became she became like basically the police of that system.
Yes.
So that's where I was talking about earlier about how she had a hard time making judgment, because what I disagree with L. Ron Hubbard on it is that a computer should have judgment. It doesn't have to have, it's not black and white. There are
Right.
situations that come up where you have to go like, well, no, we need to change. And
Yes.
that was my other observation as far as how she operated, dealing with staff members and that type of thing. So I don't know if it was like that when you were there.
Oh, it absolutely was. In fact, Shelley and Miscavige, David Miscavige for that matter, had brought up that the computers would flush out people not performing their duties because it was unrelenting in terms of the concept in Scientology of you write reports on anyone not performing, you write reports on anyone, on any transgression, anyone not following their schedule, all of that. And obviously, those reports all accumulate in a
Hmm.
folder dedicated to your ethics as a member of the Sea organization. And
Right.
so the concept was that if you're not complying, the computer is going to start spitting out reports on you for not doing that, and all of a sudden it will be very clear who the quote unquote fat ethics files are. Those are the people that are probably suppressives, or at
Right.
the very least potential trouble sources, and the computer is going to do that work for the organization to figure out who are the people that are holding the whole show down.
I'll give you though the biggest example of that for me personally, and it was the only time that I got upset with Shelly and actually talked back to her and went above her to Dave. Okay,
Yep.
and that was during the when RTC when Miscavige took over the Religious Technology Center, and they came in on a mission and they threw out everybody and sent them to the RPF and all that, right? Well, he had me work out the organizational chart, the org board for Religious Technology, and I did every department, every valuable final product, every division. I worked all of that out so that there was an inspector general, an inspector general for ethics, for tech, for administration. I That was my job to get that all written out and then formulated, right, as well as
Yes.
the statistics for everybody. I did all that. Okay, so I'm
Yes.
working on that during the mission, and here comes Shelly just nudging away on these lower priority stuff that needed to get done, but she just kept nudging me. And then, like you said, there would be punishments attached to it, like, couldn't eat, or rice and beans, or
Right.
no liberty, or whatever.
Yep.
And I just turned around, and when she was nudging me on this thing, and I just blew up at her. I said, I'm doing what Dave told me to do, and this is the priority, and I could care less about that little, like, I just had it, right?
Yep.
And Dave was in the other office, and he could hear me, and he
Oh.
called Shelly over to his office because we had a connecting door. He called
Right.
Shelly over and closed the door. And I knew that on. I just right, because basically told her, I don't know what he told her, right? But the door opened back up, and basically she, without apologizing, she basically let me know that I was doing the right thing, you know.
Okay.
And that was the only time I ever had, like, cross words with her.
Yeah. Understood. And did you ever see David Miscavige yell at her or physically abuse her in any way?
No physical abuse.
Okay.
Never saw him really yell at her. He'd get upset or whatever. We also, uh, I took care of, like I said, their room and all that, right? Well, we had the job of waking them up for a long time, right? And Jason Bennick was doing it. He did it wrong, and he really pissed off Dave and Shelley. But so then I had to do it. Literally, I had to walk into their bedroom, and they'd be asleep in bed in order to wake them up. I mean, I'd never heard of anything like this before, and there was a whole technique to wake up David Miscavige. I didn't wake Shelley up; she'd be sleeping there, but they'd let us just walk right into their room. You know what I mean,
What
and
was the
wake them up.
technique?
The technique was because we were working all hours of the day and night, so we didn't really have a standard set schedule, right?
Yeah.
And their bedroom was in the lower villa, and our office was in the middle of villa, right? So if he said, "Hey, I want to get up at 10 o'clock in the morning," whatever time it was, um, the first thing we had to do was he had a phone line in his room, so I would call we'd have to call the room, say, "Sir, it's time to get up." Okay, thanks, and hang up, right? Wait 5-10 minutes, call him again. "Sir, it's time to get up."
Hmm.
Okay, that's fine. During that time, we're making coffee, right? Making coffee. And then I literally would have to walk into his room, around the bed to his side of the bed, put the coffee down, and gently, gently, touch him and go and shake him and say, "Sir, your coffee's here. It's time to get up." You know what I mean? And until he actually got up and sat up and started drinking his coffee,
I see.
and then we could leave, right? But Jason, a couple times, didn't make sure that he woke up, so that's why he exploded,
I
because he
see.
just called twice and then forgot to do the rest of it.
I
But
see.
Shelley be sound asleep. I mean, I'd never heard of going into a married couple's room before and doing something like that.
Right. Yeah. And during the years that I was there, they had separate rooms.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, that never happened when I was there. They had the officers' lounge, right, which
Yes.
used to be Pat and Annie Broker's um, bedroom, and
Oh,
then their room was right next to it, right. And then once the RTC reorganization and they kicked out Pat and Annie and all that sort of stuff, then they made that quote unquote the officers' lounge, but really it was Miscavige's living room with his stereo system and all that. And then right before I left, they actually took over another lower villa room to make their closet because they had so many clothes. I mean,
yes.
David Miscavige, I don't know about you at the time when you were there, but he had a huge collection of Tony Lama cowboy boots. I mean, like
Oh,
huge. And they had all sorts of clothes, and all their clothes were tailor made by Mr. Lee or whatever.
yes.
And yeah, he was the guy who did their uniform. So then he had to start doing clothes for them and stuff. So they had privilege. I mean,
Yeah. And in
even
later
when I
years,
was
that
there.
was taken over by Claudio and Renata Lugli from
Oh
Italy.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I
so
remember hearing about
they
Mr. Lee. I never met him, but he definitely was there for a few more years after you left.
yeah,
He brought in,
and it's not like people go like, well, what isn't Miscavige wealthy? He doesn't need to be wealthy. All this stuff was paid for by Scientology. All the
right,
tax exempt dollars paid for his tailored clothes, his
right.
shoes that were made in London, all that stuff, right? That was all
Yeah,
paid for that. Not to mention bonuses. I mean, we talked about that in my video before too. But Miscavige made sure that he got paid, okay, a lot of money. So when
right.
he came over from Author Services and became the chairman of the board of RTC, all of a sudden we got this new bonus system which paid him and Shelly a lot of money, right?
Yep,
And and I got money too. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, a bonus for me would be like $1,500 to $2,000. You know what I mean? Like it was a monthly bonus, I think. And that was a lot of money when you're not, everybody else is making $35 or not getting paid at all.
yeah,
So that's why I was able to stack up money. But Dave
yes,
and Shelley's bonuses were like $7,000, $8,000 between the two of them a month. So
right,
they were making over $100,000 a year with no expenses, and
right.
they did that for years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, during the
that.
years that I was in internal exec, so, number three,
Mhm.
according to Scientology
Oh yeah, you
lawyers.
were. So you were over Barbara Griffin.
Yes, I was. Barbara Griffin. Oh boy, I
Well,
gained some gray
she
hairs.
made sure that Dave and Shelley got paid.
She did. But also, there were a few times, a number of years actually, where I had to prepare and get approved by Shelley all the year-end bonuses,
Yes,
which
that was
was
a
for a
big
small
deal. Ooh,
handful
that was
by
a
the
lot of
time.
money.
Yeah, but by the time I was doing that, it was a small handful of RT Religious Technology Center staff, but it was carefully constructed so that Miscavige was number one in terms of highest paid, Laurie
Hmm.
Stukenbrock was number two, and
Hmm.
Shelley was number three.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was intentionally structured that way so that Mr. and Mrs. Miscavige were not the top two paid principals in the Church of Scientology.
Right, and see their bonuses were set up. The bonus was based on the amount of Sea Org reserves increase versus liabilities, financial liabilities. Right. Well, Sea Org reserves went up almost every week
Yep,
because they were just stripping money from the Clearwater base and from other organizations, and then they would reappraise properties, and assign them
yep,
value for SOR. So that Sea Org reserves was constantly going up, and that it was like easy money for them.
right. Yes, interesting.
And then of course later I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, that he actually demanded commissions on donations for the IAS. I don't know, I
Huh.
wasn't there for that, so I
I
don't know if
wasn't
that's
there for
true or
that
not.
either. It wouldn't
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily surprise me though.
But
I
as the
certainly
internal exec, they were making money. I mean,
right.
the regular staff weren't, but they were making money.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in
Can I ask you a
conclusion,
question? Did
yeah,
you have
sure, go
any
ahead.
trouble with Shelley? Did you have any troubles with Shelley?
Shelley, I mean, obviously I got, I would get in trouble with her a lot. I
Hmm.
never considered that she was intentionally demeaning, trying to cut me down, any of that, which I
Right.
very definitely did with some other staff members. Very
Yeah.
definitely. But Shelley, I never I always considered her senior to me and a mentor type
Hmm.
figure to me. Um, and so even if I was in trouble and she was yelling at me or pissed off with me, which definitely happened on numerous occasions, I didn't really think that she was intentionally trying to be evil per se. I
No,
always
I
viewed
didn't
it that
either.
she was in a very tough spot and catching a lot of flack from David Miscavige and trying her darndest to make things better. That's just personally how I observed Shelley.
Yeah, and then like for me too. I mean, she treated me with respect. I never thought she was being mean to me, but by the same token, she would, she wasn't happy about something she pointed out. But I
Right.
had staff. You could Jackie Wolf or whatever.
Yes.
She was like she worked directly with Shelly in my office, handling administrative, typing up things and that type of thing. And Shelly talked down to her a lot. You know what I mean? Like made her not feel like she was doing her job, and or just whatever. She just didn't treat her very nicely, and I'm sure Jackie would tell you the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
Anyway,
my experience, but again, none of my experiences, nobody should have to live through 18 years of captivity. That is
right?
just insane, and that it's happening today. The question,
Absolutely.
where is Shelly Miscavige, to me truly epitomizes what Scientology is able to get away with in the United States of
Hmm.
America in today's world.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It
Anyway,
really is.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your experiences with Shelley from the 14 years you knew her. In
Yeah.
conclusion, my question to you is,
Okay.
what would you tell Shelley if you saw her today?
I'd tell her to come, that you come live your life, experience freedom. That you have many friends and people that you may not have considered to be friends that will open their doors with open arms and help you.
Yes.
And the Aftermath Foundation is a good point, but I mean, there's lots of other people that we would welcome her with open arms. I,
Yeah.
I don't hold any ill will towards anybody that I had rough experiences with in the Sea organization. uh, I I'm sure you feel the same way. I mean, we were all under the same pressure. So
Right.
when people come out and there's like, oh yeah, yeah, I had a bad experience with them. I don't really have a problem with them.
Yeah. Well said. And here's hoping that day comes where we can tell Shelley that to her face. And in the
Yeah,
meantime, we'll keep talking.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And until next time.
Thanks, Claire.